Please like, share and subscribe.
Mga kababayan, nandito naman po kami para magbigay ng sharing ukol sa International Criminal Court or ICC na naging very contested, very important issue na tinatalakay ngayon sa Pilipinas. Gusto naming magbahagi ng aming mga obserbasyon, ng aming kaalaman, ng aming mga karanasan ukol dito para naman lumawak yung ating mga perspektibo regarding sa ICC at saka implikasyon sa ating bayan. Nawa ay susundan ninyo ang buong video presentation na ito. Maraming salamat po. Mga kababayan, magandang gabi, magandang araw, assalamualaikum. Greetings and goodwill sa inyong lahat. Sa gabing ito, kami, mga grupo ng Overseas Filipino nasa Indonesia, would wish to share with you our study, our experience, our knowledge about ICC with respect to Malaysia, with respect to Indonesia and Singapore. Mga kabayan, gusto namin i-share ito para lumawak yung ating perspektibo, lumawak yung ating mga kaalaman sa mga bagay-bagay na relevant sa ICC na issue dyan sa Pilipinas sa ngayon. Mga kababayan, as you can see here, among the ASEAN member countries, you will see that Philippines has withdrawn from the ICC. And here you can see that only Cambodia is the one that is currently, a signatory to the Rome Statute. All the other members of ASEAN member countries do not accede or have not acceded to the ICC. And I would like to focus on the three major countries which are more or less very close to the Philippines. One is Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore. Mga kaibigan, mga kababayan, what I would like to say is that among the ASEAN member countries, only the Philippines and Cambodia were originally part of the ICC. Now the Philippines has withdrawn, so therefore it is only Cambodia who is left as a member or a signatory to the Rome Statute. All the other member countries like Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Brunei, they are not a signatory to the Rome Statute. So tonight sa gabing ito, I would like to focus on discussing about the explanation, the rationale, the circumstances behind why Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore have not yet acceded to the Rome Statute.
We have made a decision that we will not recognize the Statute of Rome. We understand that this is a political move.
Indonesian stand with respect to ICC. If you can see from the data that we have gathered here, that we have studied here, is that this is a publication from the Mahkamah Konstitusi Republik Indonesia. This is the Constitutional Court of Indonesia, which is a parallel court with the Supreme Court of Indonesia. Indonesia's Supreme Court is called Mahkamah Agung, while the Constitutional Court is called Mahkamah Konstitusi. If you see here in the picture, you will see these are the justices, more or less the same setup as the Supreme Court, And then constitutional, pleadings, and issues that are brought to them for jurisprudence. Now, during this session, during this hearing with the Mahkamah Konstitusi or the Constitutional Court of Indonesia, it was explained by the representative, by the legal expert of the executive department, the President of the Republic of Indonesia, the position of the Indonesian state with respect to ICC or with respect to the Rome Statute. You will see here that, for example, I put Indonesia and then ICC. The premise of the Indonesian state is that someone who is honored, honorable, respected for his loyal service to the country, to the flag and the people, while ICC may consider this person as an accused and eventually found guilty, that's something that Indonesia cannot accept. And that is one fundamental reason for them not acceding into the ICC. The other one is the thin line between willing to prosecute and unwilling to prosecute. In Indonesia, they may believe, firmly believe, that they're willing to prosecute human rights cases or cases against humanity. But in the eyes of the ICC, it is perceived as the Indonesian state is unwilling to prosecute. This is more or less the fundamental essence why Indonesia believe that someone who is treasured, loved with the people, for his loyalty to the country, for his meritorious contribution to the state, to the people of Indonesia, will be found guilty, will be accused, malign his reputation and found guilty by another country, which is ICC in this case. And that's something that Indonesia believes that it is so unfair. It is not. This is not in compliance. It is not in accordance with their belief, and this is the fundamental reason why Indonesia has not acceded to the ICC. I will just basically read what was stated in the formal response or arguments, pleadings by the constitutional expert, international criminal law expert representing the state of Indonesia. And I like to read as follows. Indonesia has not ratified the Rome Statute because we are not willing to let a person who is called a hero in our country be considered a loser, meaning to say a loser accused and found guilty in another country. So a hero in our country, that's Indonesia, but is considered a loser in another country. That's the literal translation of the Bahasa Indonesia. We still say that we do not want to follow the Rome Statute, said international law expert Hikmahanto Juwana when he delivered his expert testimony in the judicial review or in the constitutional court of that particular case, of the particular legislation on human rights. There's an additional point here. He said that judges and prosecutors need to have a very good understanding. Judges and prosecutors need to have a good understanding to carry out the legal proceedings against perpetrators of gross human rights violations so that Indonesia does not fall into the unwilling category. And he also further stated that not only developing countries commit gross human rights violations, advanced countries violate as well human rights. So Indonesia still wants to further analyze, further to determine that, for example, war criminals from developed countries, I'd like to highlight, war criminals from developed countries and European countries face justice when gross human rights violations occur. And unless that Indonesia will find comfort in these concerns, I think that's the only time that we'll accede to the Rome Statute. There's an additional point here. He said that judges and prosecutors need to have a very good understanding. Judges and prosecutors need to have a good understanding to carry out the legal proceedings against perpetrators of gross human rights violations so that Indonesia does not fall into the unwilling category. And he also further stated that not only developing countries commit gross human rights violations, advanced countries violate as well human rights. So Indonesia still wants to further analyze what further to determine that, for example, war criminals from developed countries, I'd like to highlight war criminals from developed countries and European countries face justice when gross human rights violations occur. HokomOnline.com is a very reliable with respect to news regarding legal matters, legal issues, and so on and so forth. Now, I'd like to read the English translation of that relevant article. I'd like also to share to our audience an article, a news actually from Hokom Online. Here it says, the government of Indonesia is fearful to ratify the Rome Statute, and these are the reasons. There are fears that perpetrators of past gross human rights violations will be dragged to the International Criminal Court. Aside from concerns that past human rights crimes will be brought to the ICC, there were also those who accused that the Rome Statute threatens this state sovereignty, meaning the sovereignty of Indonesia. So if you see, for example, past human rights violations that the worried will be, brought up will be, they use the word drag to the International Criminal Court, and there are also fear of encroachment of the sovereignty of Indonesia. Mga kababayan, I'd like to move on to the position of Singapore with respect to the Rome Statute or ICC. If you try to look at the process, Singapore's been very active, but in the final, in the final stage, the final voting, Singapore abstained from voting to adopt the statute. Mga kabayan, gusto kong i-share sa inyo itong very important legal article published by the US Criminal Justice Club, a very prominent top university in Singapore. Singapore says that it always supported a strong court. And then in the last 10 hours, provisions were strangely fixed with respect to the question of jurisdictions, which had appeared for the first time at the last minute of the conference. So if you see, according to Singapore, they were in favor of, the provisions of the statute, but in the last minute, with a few countries, leading their way, they were able to fix or to amend certain provisions at the last minute, and one of which is the most important is the question of jurisdictions, which according to Singapore, which had appeared for the first time at the last minute of the conference. And this is something that they take exceptions, or they took exceptions. And then they were also pushing for the inclusion of the death penalty in that provision of the International Court. But since inclusion of death penalty was not adopted, Singapore expressed reservations, and that's the reason why they abstained for the adoption of the statute. In Singapore, death penalty is a capital punishment, which is legal in Singapore, and perhaps that's the fundamental reason why they are not comfortable on acceding to the Rome Statute. Let us try to recap a bit of certain conclusion here. Singapore's diplomatic strategy, meaning to say that Singapore's abstention, on the adoption of the Rome Statute is a diplomatic strategy. Singapore's non-accession to the statute is representative of its overall attitude towards international institutions and treaties. For instance, Singapore has yet to accept compulsory jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice, ICJ, and is not a state party to both the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, as well as the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So, if you see, the net, they are yet to accede to the ICC. They are also has not yet, according to this article, Singapore has yet to accept. Singapore has yet to accept compulsory jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice, and it is not also a party to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It is not also a party to the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. There's a very important point here that they mentioned. Singapore's calculated stance. Singapore, Singapore's calculated stance is consistent across the board and commands an interagency consensus on its realistic role with respect to these international creatures, be the be either they're legal, financial, or political. So if you see that unless and until they really comprehend, the interagency has the consensus that this is for the best interest of Singapore. This is for the best interest of the people. This is the paramount national interest of Singapore. Then that's the only time that they will accede to this international treaties, international, we call it international creatures or a creation where you bind with international partners. So bottom line, Singapore, I would say, is even more conservative with respect to surrendering, quote unquote, their sovereign rights, their sovereign freedom, and bind themselves without really truly understanding the implications of that decision.